takes a time until it's set up. Here now, I just also want to go live on Facebook. Oh, that's not possible. You can only go on one thing live. Okay, doesn't matter. We just go live on Facebook. Okay. Takes time until it's set up. I have now. I just also want to go live on Facebook. That's not. So I have to mute here. That's always delayed on the streaming. Okay, so now I start recording also, and then we're gonna start. Okay, good. So I'm very happy to introduce Patricia Sanders, who is the co-author of The Antidote to Violence, Evaluation, the Evidence of a new book that provides evidence that transcendental meditation is advanced and its advanced programs can reduce violence and crime in society by significantly reducing the levels of collective stress and tension. And Patricia was trained as a teacher of transcendental meditation and taught the technique for 15 years. And she's also an award-winning PhD and graduated in the Department of Consciousness and Human Potential at the Maharishi International University, USA. And her topic is very precious because that's what we really need. It's the Maharishi Effect in the modern world and a key for personal enlightenment. And generally accepted is transcendental meditation practice increases energy and inner peace on the individual level that we have seen through 600 scientific research studies. But also evidence suggests that there's also a similar effect produced in society. There are 50 demonstration and 20 peer-reviewed and published studies indicate that governments can achieve a lessening of violence, not on the basis of political rhetoric or a stronger police or military presence, but on the rise of harmony, coherence, or order in collective consciousness, and the togetherness or collectiveness of consciousness of all the people who make a group for society. And the finding of these studies are more relevant now than ever before, at the time of pandemic, protests, social unrest, and each of the 20 experiments documented the effect of sufficient number of people meditating at one place, that it has a very, very strong effect on the society when we have a permanent group for peace. And that's one of my dearest topics, because I always see that we only have a change in society when collective consciousness changes. And we only can rise to enlightenment if we have a group for peace, or as Maharishi said, a group for invincibility. So now it's my great joy to give the word to Patricia, and she will tell us much more about this topic now.
Thank you, Rajajeshri, Mona. That's a very nice introduction, much appreciated. It's very nice to see so many people actually on this talk. I understand that there are simultaneous translations, so if I'm going too fast, then please let me know and I'll try and slow down a bit. Okay, so you'll have to bear with me. I'm just going to share my screen and just give me a moment to get there. Okay, so I hope everybody can see that all right. So the topic is the Maharishi Effect in the modern world, which, as Rajajeshri has explained so beautifully, is more needed today, I think, than perhaps, or at least as much as any other time in recent decades. So I think that Rajajeshri is correct. Our planet is going through a major change, and evidence suggests that a small number of people, just like you, can affect change in the world, and also make sure that the change is smooth, because we know that the planet is shaking at the moment with everything that's going on, pandemic, social unrest. So we would like the change to be over quickly and to be very smooth. And we want to see an age coming that's not just characterized by say, an absence of poverty or war, but is characterized by everybody being able to live their full potential, for life to be in harmony with natural law, to be blissful, and for people basically to be happy and fulfilled. So it's generally accepted that transcendental meditation practice can affect peace and happiness for the individual. But research has shown, as I'm sure you know, that peace and harmony can be the reality for society as well. And as Rajajeshri said, it's not on the basis of political rhetoric or a stronger police force or stronger military presence, but on the basis of a rise in harmony, coherence. And coherence, of course, is order. It's order, it's unifying. In a way, it's the growth of tenderness, the growth of love in the world, because coherence is unifying and love unifies. So I think we can always look at it that way, however much we might want to also look at it in terms of scientific research. We should never forget that it's based on a very human emotion. So I just wanted to say that collective consciousness, just to make it clear for anybody that perhaps is not so familiar with the term, it's the togetherness of consciousness of the individuals who make up a group. And Maharishi holds that collective consciousness, in the case of an individual country, for instance, is the essence of a nation that continues generation after generation, and it can be coherent or incoherent. Either way, it affects every part of national life. And Maharishi holds that the government is an innocent mirror of the collective consciousness of the nation, but the government also has a role to play in improving the collective consciousness. So it's a dual role for any government. They're both the innocent mirror, but they also have the responsibility to improve collective consciousness. And so a reciprocal relationship. Sorry, I'm just having difficulty. Let me see if I can just share my screen again. It didn't seem to want to change. It didn't seem to want to change slides. So let's go from here. Good. So Maharishi says the administered is administering the administrator as much as the administrator is administrating the administered. And that's the reality of collective consciousness. It's the ultimate democracy where everyone, all of us, we are administrating our government as much as our government is administering us. So Maharishi has stated that everywhere in the world today, there's a lack of happiness, harmony, and real freedom. And this shows that life on earth is not lived in perfect accord with natural law. And I just want to clarify that because Maharishi describes natural law as the managing intelligence of pure consciousness or transcendental consciousness. And its various components are the laws of nature. It's the holistic totality of all the laws of nature. And when we live life in accord with natural law, then that means that every part of us is correlating completely with the style of functioning of natural law. Then we can achieve freedom, real freedom in ourselves. And if we have real freedom, then we're at peace. We feel peace and happiness. So experience tells us that Maharishi's programs can bring that peace and harmony into our individual life. But the experience of many of you, and it's backed up by scientific research, which I'll be coming to in a moment, suggests that what you've been doing today is supported by traditional wisdom of humanity. In particular, it's supported by the Vedic literature, and the Yoga Sutra is a branch of the Vedic literature, and and one aphorism. I hope I'm not speaking too slowly. I'm just trying to find a balance so that it's easy for everybody to understand what I'm saying. One aphorism, Vedic aphorism from the Yoga Sutra, Maharishi Patanjali, states Tat Sanitao Vairat Yagaha, in the vicinity of coherence yoga, hostile tendencies are eliminated. And that's Maharishi's translation. Maharishi actually predicted that there would be an influence of peace from his programs in 1960, when he said that my calculation is that the day 1/10 of the adult population of the world begins to meditate a half hour, morning and evening, and begins to emit an influence of peace and harmony from the deepest level of consciousness. From that day, the atmosphere of the world, this negative atmosphere of the world, will be neutralized. So Maharishi knew right from the start that his programs would create an influence of peace in society. And my talk today is actually based on the book I wrote with another governor, Barry Spivak from the UK. It's called An Antidote to Violence. And we wrote it because we wanted to inspire scientists to investigate collective consciousness. We wanted them to examine peer-reviewed and published research indicating that transcendental meditation and its advanced programs can influence the collective consciousness in a positive direction. And we also wanted to encourage governments to consider at least doing more research on the Maharishi Effect, and with a view to implementing it in society, so that they don't only create peace in their own country, but also create peace in the world. And I'm going to start by saying that war, terrorism, violence generally cannot make a country or a people happy or fulfilled. Such things are a tragedy. They're a failure of tolerance and a loss of concern for the lives and the happiness of other people. The trouble is that no amount of pleading or repression can stop people who are convinced that they're right and that aggressive actions are justifiable from actually carrying out violent acts. And if the consciousness of these individuals is stressed, then any rationalization that's based on that consciousness will consider aggression as a suitable means of fulfilling extreme goals. But we're actually fortunate to be living in a time when we can know the source of our problems, and we can also know the underlying cause, and we have the knowledge to be able to deal with it. And our knowledge and the confidence that we can have in expressing it, as far as the Maharishi Effect is concerned, is based on 16 points here. Some of the points, I'm just going to very briefly go through them, but some of them have been put in bold, and I'm going to explain the significance of that in a moment. The important thing is that research results have been replicated, and there's been over 150 outcomes. It's been published in peer-reviewed journals, and it's been checked by independent experts, because that's what peer review is. When scientists submit a paper to a reputable journal, then other scientists who have nothing to do with the author of the paper go through the paper very, very carefully and make sure that it's accurate and so on. So over 30 scientists have been involved in Maharishi Effect research. The researchers themselves are also experts in their field. The measured changes were predicted in advance. That's been the case really from the beginning. The research design used publicly available data. For instance, in the US, it's used data from the FBI crime reports. And the research results are statistically significant. So coming to the last number of reasons, the experimental designs are stronger than other international conflict designs. somehow I think because we're dealing with a subject that's unfamiliar and may seem rather unusual to some scientists, we therefore have to be much stronger. We have to have stronger designs for our research, and they have to be more thoroughly vetted. So it's always good when you see that the designs are stronger than other international designs. So in some studies, different methods of selecting controls were used. The studies examined diverse and normally unconnected variables. And that's very important because, you know, if you think of some of the research where the variables, for instance, war injuries, war fatalities, infant mortality, or ordinary accidents in the home, these would not normally show a similar pattern. And yet, with the Maharishi effect, they all start to move in a more positive direction. So that's what that point actually means. The studies have shown a dosage effect, and that means that the greater the numbers, then the greater the effect. And studies have also controlled for or investigated other explanations for changes, and you'll be surprised how thoroughly they do investigate everything from, you know, the amount of police presence to even the weather or the Earth's magnetic field. There are many things that can give rise to problems, but our studies have controlled for and investigated other explanations. And the research has utilized a variety of experimental contexts. And the research also utilized time series analysis and seasonality. And finally, the selection of the statistical model reduces the risk of bias. Now, all these points are important, but the ones that I've put in bold are extremely important because they indicate a causal relationship between the study and the results of the study, so that it's not just a statistical correlation, which could be argued with. It's a definite causal relationship. And I should say that it's the ones I put in bold, when they're taken together, that's what indicates the correlation, the causal relationship. Each one on its own perhaps could be argued with, but taken together, they're extremely strong. And one thing I just want to say about the Maharishi effect is that, this incidentally is a picture of the United Nations. All organizations, for instance, United Nations, all NGOs and organizations that either work for peace or are working to uplift the quality of life, they do marvelous work, and the Maharishi effect does not undermine their efforts, their hard-working efforts. What it does is to increase their success by creating positive conditions that help traditional methods. For instance, even negotiations or diplomacy can be more successful if the collective consciousness is on a much higher level. One thing though, the reality is that to create lasting peace and to be really successful, governments, the UN and other organizations need a new approach which really comprises three things. They have to understand the role of individual and societal tensions, responsible for creating a build-up of social stress in the collective consciousness of a nation. They have to be aware of the decreasing risk of political conflict through a reduction in the build-up of stress. And we want them to recognize the collective impact of transcendental meditation and its advanced programs. And of course, we know what these are: mental techniques that bring deep rest and release of individual and social tensions. So now we come to the Maharishi effect itself. The term Maharishi effect covers the influence of transcendental meditation and its advanced programs in the social environment. It's supported by more than 50 demonstrations and 20 peer-reviewed studies, all of which suggest that creating coherence in collective consciousness can result in improvements in the quality of life in society, and also prevent personal, national, international conflict without the use of force. Now, the first evidence of this emerged in the mid-70s, while examining 4 Midwestern cities in which 1% of the population had been meditating, practicing transcendental meditation. Sociologist Garland Landreth found that in each city, crime rates were decreasing. And this initial finding was enlarged to incorporate 11 cities and 11 control cities. I think you can see here, these are the 11 cities where 1% were practicing transcendental meditation, and these were the controls. And the results of the study, which was actually completed in 1976, showed that there was a 16.5 decrease in crime rates. Now, 2 further pilot studies confirmed Garland Landreth's initial finding and actually showed a larger reduction in the crime rate, 30%. This, of course, is a picture I took from Google Images. It's a picture of Dr. Michael Dilbeck, who I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, and he's a hero of many of the Maharishi Effect studies. And he carried out a follow-up study to the earlier studies, which took new factors into account, and these included population density, median time of education, percentage of people in the same home after 5 years, and per capita income. And then the crime data was taken from public sources and showed that the initial hypothesis was correct, that just a few people, small percentage of the population, could affect social change. His research was published in the Journal of Crime and Justice, and it was the first published research on the Maharishi Effect. Now, in 1976, Maharishi introduced the TM City program, which, as you know, stabilizes the experience of transcendental consciousness. It accelerates the development of human potential. And by creating a better atmosphere in collective consciousness, it increases the probability that stability, growth, fulfillment can be the norm for personal and societal relations. The most powerful of the TM cities, as you are well aware, is of course the yogic flying technique. I don't need to say very much about that because you're all very familiar with it. Other to say that when we practice yogic flying, we experience more brain integration than simply practicing transcendental meditation alone, especially just before the body lifts up and moves forward in a series of short hops. So I want to just go through a few more examples and then say a little bit more about the mechanics. This is a picture of Biskinta. Biskinta was a village, or is a village, in the Lebanon, and it's a Syriac word actually, meaning the house of wisdom, which is very interesting because some of the early research after Maharishi introduced this Transcendental Meditation City program, the first research was actually carried out here. It was actually at the end of June in 1982 when 1% of the 10,000 strong population of Biskinta actually had learned Transcendental Meditation, and 5 had learned and were practicing the TM City program. The researchers included Dr. Tony Nader, who is now, of course, Rajaram and the leader of our movement. And he predicted that due to the numbers practicing Transcendental Meditation and the TM City program, there would be a decrease in the incoming shells, casualties, and property damage. I expect you're aware that there was quite a very serious conflict going on at the time, and Baskinta was in the middle of it because it's actually placed in an extremely strategic area. I think Baskinta was actually Dr. Nader's home as well, and he clearly felt a deep responsibility for trying to improve the situation there. So after 1% of the population practiced, then the number of incoming shells actually decreased to 0. And it was a different situation in neighboring villages where the shelling of those villages continued, but it stopped in Baskinta. And that was after 1% actually learned the transcendental meditation technique. So it's a very significant piece of research. So this, of course, is quite a popular study to talk about. It was actually a follow-up to a previous study, which was the IPPME, the International Peace Programme in the Middle East, which took place in the summer of 1983. The IPPME had originally demonstrated that group practice of transcendental meditation and the TM-City program could reduce the fierceness of conflict between Israel and Lebanon, and also improve the quality of life in Israel. Now, in the later study, Harvard-trained researchers John Davis and Charles Alexander reanalyzed the IPPME and looked at all 7 transcendental meditation studies, or assemblies rather, that were large enough to have an effect on the civil war in Lebanon. And the locations were Israel, that was in the summer of 1983. That was the IPPME. This was the Taste of Utopia Assembly, December 1983. And then Lebanon again, that was just a small course, that was March 1984. Yugoslavia, April 1984, and the Netherlands, Hague course in December 1984. And back again in the USA, Fairfield, actually, July 1985. And over the 93 days that the assemblies were large enough to have an effect on Lebanon, the results were as follows. There was a 66 increase in the level of cooperation among antagonists, a 48% reduction in the level of conflict, 71 reduction in war fatalities, and a 68% reduction in war injuries. That's very significant, of course. You might wonder what the connection is between the results and the photograph. This is a photograph of another part of Lebanon. It shows Lebanon at peace, and I think that means it meant a lot to me to actually have that photograph, because so much damage was done to Lebanon, and yet underneath it's such a very beautiful and very peaceful country, and it deserves to have peace. So now, of course, we come to Washington, DC, another research study. In 1993, this particular study took place in the very hot summer of that year. The review board, or rather the researchers, predicted actually it was an independent review board, that if sufficient numbers participated, coherence would be created in the collective consciousness of Washington. Well, of course, probably many of you were actually on that course. A lot of us, many of us, went to Washington in that year, 1993. And I think the numbers, it's very clear what the study is saying. You can see that as the numbers increased, then the level of violent crime decreased. And actually it was very significant, because by the end of the study, levels of violent crime had actually decreased by 23%. And this is a lady, journalist, Sally Quinn, she reported in the Washington Post on the enhanced presidential popularity that suddenly appeared out of nowhere. I'm just going to have to move this so that I can see. I don't know whether you can see what I'm doing. She wrote that the Clinton administration appears to have been revived, but such a swift reversal of political fortune is not easy to account for. The inmates may logically wonder whether Clinton really turned things round, or if something else is going on almost mysteriously and almost overnight in the face of government's distress. The press seemed to be transformed from a hostile, angry mob to a pack of fawning pussycats, as she described it. Now that appeared in the Washington Post in July the 18th, 1993. I think that was during the 6th or 7th week of the Washington course. And again, it's interesting that people outside the movement recognize that something can suddenly change. They don't know what it is, but they can sense it. And of course, we come to the Invincible America Assembly because, you know, today we may not have the Cold War, we may not have the terrible conditions of the past, but the Maharishi Effect is still just as important today, even though there are indications, obviously, of rising consciousness. But there are still areas that need some improvement. And the Invincible America Assembly was actually the first long-term study to document the peace-promoting effects of a number of people, a large number of people actually in this case, practicing the TM and TM City programs together. So a lot of different things happened during this course. For instance, violent crime reduced, homicides reduced. Just to make it clear, you can see this shows the amount by which they reduced. Traffic fatalities, other accidents, drug-related deaths, and of course, infant mortality, all decreased compared to the baseline period. And again, if you think back to those 16 points I mentioned early on, the fact that so many otherwise unrelated variables decreased is an indication that there is a causal relationship between those who were on the Invincible America Assembly between 2000, especially between 2007 and 2010, and the these decreases that were going on in society. These studies, there were 4 studies done in all, and they were published in peer-reviewed journals. Interestingly, actually, another study has been submitted for publication which measured what was going on in America from 2011 onwards, when, of course, the crime, the numbers on the Invincible America Assembly started to reduce. It's something of a negative proof because things began to get a lot worse, actually. So just to, again, confirm, the Washington Post reported on May the 25th in 2010, the national violent crime rate had risen in 2005 and 2006. And this was before the IAA assembly began. The crimes of violence began going down in 2007, falling 0.7% that year, and then an additional 1.9% in 2008. The trend accelerated in 2009 with a 5.5% reduction in overall violent crime. So this was the Washington Post again reporting in 2010. And of course, from 2011 onwards, then the numbers reduced and things didn't go so well. So it's natural, of course, to want to understand the mechanics. These can be understood on the level of physics and on the level of consciousness. I think because of time passing, I'm just going to deal with understanding the Maharishi effect on the level of consciousness. Maharishi considers that the Maharishi effect is an impulse, if you like, from transcendental consciousness. And he describes transcendental consciousness as wholeness, aware of itself, devoid of differences, beyond the division of subject and object. Transcendental consciousness, it's a field of all possibilities, where all creative potentialities exist together, infinitely correlated, but as yet unexpressed. Perhaps some of the two most significant words in this, for the purpose of this understanding the Maharishi effect, infinitely correlated, because when the mind settles down, experiences transcendental consciousness, and then the body lifts up and moves in a series of hops, short or long, then it's influencing society from the level of transcendental consciousness, level of infinite correlation. And that's why it can affect so many different categories. That's why it isn't just crime that goes down, but generally the quality of life improves. EEG coherence also measures transcendental consciousness in those that practice TM and the TM City program. And it's found that experiences of transcendental consciousness, they reset the brain, they heal the impact of past trauma. And this is particularly seen in military veterans who've had the most appalling experiences that I think any of us can have. And of course, by creating a peaceful or more coherent atmosphere in collective consciousness, then the whole quality of life can improve. And I just wanted to look at something that I'm sure you're probably familiar with, the Meissner effect, but I just thought I would mention it anyway, because it's an analogy in nature. It's not one thing influencing another. It's simply a parallel analogy. In 1993, Walter Meissner and Robert Oxenfeld discovered the Meissner effect, which is something that occurs in certain metals at extremely low temperatures and is characterized by a total absence of magnetic infiltration. In an ordinary conductor, electrical conductor, those very disorderly, incoherent electrons allow, as you can see here, they allow an external magnetic field to get through. But it's not the case in a superconductor, because when the electrons all line up in a very coherent, orderly way, then the external magnetic field can't get through. And it's the same thing with the Maharishi effect, you see. A small number of people can set up a kind of national armor, kavach, around the country, which prevents hostile influences from getting through. So the interesting thing is that we're not the only ones in the Transcendental Meditation movement that are becoming aware of this effect, although they don't, of course, have the deep knowledge of what's going on that Maharishi did and has passed on to us. This is a picture of the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in New York, which is dedicated to bringing science to ordinary everyday life. Now, it's carried out a number of research projects and produced study indicating that when 10% of the population, this is nothing to do with TM, just when 10% of an ordinary population holds an unshakable belief, the belief will always be adopted by the majority in society. And they actually give the experience of the overthrow of the leaders of Tunisia and Egypt in 2010 and 2011, who were removed in a matter of weeks as a result of a complete change of thinking in the population. It was just 10%, and then suddenly, whoosh, the change happened. Now, while the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute puts the figure at 10%, Erica Chenoweth, who's a professor of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School, puts the figure far lower at 3.5%. And together with her co-author, I don't know whether you can see this actually, but she has a co-author, Maria Stefan, who is a strategic planner with the US Department of State. Now, they found that no non-violent campaign ever failed once they had achieved the active and sustained participation of just 3% of the population. So what does this mean? I mean, clearly other people, other organizations are coming to a similar conclusion, but obviously without the depth of knowledge. And what it means is that with transcendental meditation, 1% or the square root of 1% of the population meditating, practicing the TM Siddhis affects change. But without transcendental meditation, it may take between 3.5% and 10% to affect change. But I'm going to, again, make a caveat here, because the change without TM, without Maharishi's knowledge, the change may not always be the best change, because of course decisions made and the opinions are not necessarily rooted in the transcendent, and therefore it's far more volatile. Validation has come from, I'm not sure how much time I have left. Rajeshri, can you tell me whether I have some time left? Or?
You have some time left, yes.
Okay, so I'll just go through these. You know, there's been a lot of validation really of the Maharishi effect over the years. David Edwards here, professor of government at the University of Texas at Austin, said that the claim can be plausibly made that the potential impact of this research exceeds that of any other ongoing social or psychological research program. Research has survived a broader array of statistical tests than most research in the field of conflict resolution. I think this work and the theory that informs it deserves the most serious consideration by academics and policymakers alike. So just going through this, you'll remember thinking back to those 16 points. The potential impact exceeds other ongoing social psychological research programs. And this research has survived a broader array of statistical texts. You remember I said that more care is taken with our research than I think with any other social program, because it's of a more unusual nature. And therefore everything about it, from the model, the design of the experiment, the review of the experiment, everything has to be at a much, much higher level. There is quite a lot of this, but just one more validation here. Hugh Dixon, Professor of Economics at Cardiff University in England. I've been following the research on the Maharishi Effect as it has developed over the last 20 years. And there's now a strong and coherent body of evidence showing that this approach provides a simple and cost-effective solution to many of the social problems we face today. And this research and its conclusions are so strong that it demands action from those responsible for government policy. If I had longer, I could have actually talked a lot about some research by Harvard graduate Carla Brown, Dr. Carla Brown, who actually tested the responses of many politicians and people in the field of conflict to the Maharishi Effect. And their reactions are actually very interesting, very telling. So finally, I think, you know, I'd like to finish by saying that every time we meditate, every time we practice the Transcendental Meditation Siddhi program, we bring some good to the world as well as to ourselves, even if we don't always feel it. Something very important is happening at the level of transcendental consciousness that is being spread not only throughout ourselves, but throughout society. I should say that we don't know everything about the Maharishi effect. In a way, it's a relatively new phenomenon that we're still grappling to understand. But we do know that it has an effect. I should say that, research does show that outside factors can affect the outcome. For instance, the size and density of the overall population, the genetic similarity of the participants in the program and the population, levels of stress in the population, and local geographic proximity. All these things can have an effect. For instance, in the US, the dosage effect was very clear because Canada was far more greatly affected by the very large courses that were taking place, especially in the mid-80s, and from Fairfield, than say was Mexico. But it's a different culture, and this can make this can have a difference. That's something we actually write about in the book. But the important thing is the Maharishi effect. It always works. There's always an effect, but the effect can be different, slightly different in different places. Anyway, many questions can be asked, but once collective consciousness is understood, it's easy to make a connection between the spread of ideas and a change in the collective consciousness. Violence and the lack of compassion that is at the basis of exclusive dogmas or exclusive ideas arises when an overload of stress, an inability to satisfy opposing interests, and disappointed expectations actually harden the human heart. And the result is rising political, religious, and ethnic tensions that fuel conflict and violence. And to dissolve this hardness requires very little, really, other than experiences of transcendental consciousness on the individual level and creating coherence in collective consciousness. So I'm going to end with some words by Maharishi. He states that here is the perfect strategy of defense for any country, however small. Looking within ourselves, we become strong through alliance with natural law. Through this strategy, every nation can now rise to invincibility, enjoying internal harmony and stability and friendly relations with all nations. Invincibility for every nation is the only sure foundation for permanent world peace. Everything we do can bring peace. Everything we do, for instance, by practicing, continuing with our program, can bring peace. And also, as I say, these wonderful organizations that are all also working to create peace, they all do good everywhere. But to have permanent peace, we really have to improve the collective consciousness. This is something that Rajajeshri Mona said right at the beginning, and it's absolutely true, because in the end, everything comes down to collective consciousness. As is the state of collective consciousness, so will be the state, the actions of the nation. So I think I'll just say Jai Gurudev and hand back to Rajajeshri.
Thank you so much for this precious talk. It's really amazing, and it's so important that we establish a group for invincibility in each country. That is our major role, and with your great book, which everybody can buy and should also have as their basic literature, I think we can just go out to officials and governments and present that knowledge which you gave so beautifully and inspire them to establish a group for peace and invincibility. So now I want to see if there are some questions. Maria, do we start with your group? Is there any questions from your group in Serbia? Very good. And we start with Carolina because she has to leave in a few minutes. So Carolina, do you want to read the question in the chat? Because that you only have a few minutes. Or is Carolina gone already? Carolina is still there. Okay. So Carolina, do you want to read the chat questions?
Hi, Mona. There's no
Hi,
question.
Huh?
There's no questions in the chat.
Okay, good. Maybe there will come some. Otherwise, if you're gone, then you're gone. But Cecilia, do you have from the Spanish group some questions? Yes, check it out, Cecilia. Okay. Okay, so then what we do, we take 2 minutes, everybody, and they can write their questions in the chat and also reflect on the most appealing point, what we always did. So whatever appealed most to you, you can just write in the chat. So we take like 2 minutes and then put them to Patricia. Okay, just take 2 minutes, write them down, whatever you like most from Patricia's talk, appealing point, and any questions you have. Yes. Patricia, did you hear the questions? If there's a
I did, yes, it's referring to synchronized meditations. Maharishi always encouraged people practicing transcendental meditation or the TM City program to synchronize their meditations. So I'm sure there is an effect. There's no research on it as yet. So I can't say it definitely, it works to this extent or that extent. I can only say that we should encourage it because Maharishi wanted it. He thought it was, the best thing to do in this kind of circumstance, I assume. And I think it's very good to do it. But that's really all I can say because, as I say, there is no actual research. And yet I don't know about you, but I find that when I can, when I synchronize my meditations with the group here in Fairfield, there is an effect. There's a kind of liveliness in the atmosphere. So I'm absolutely convinced it does have an effect. I just wait for all the heroes of research to actually, to work on that, to produce a study that shows that there is an effect. Sorry, does that answer your question or? Thank you.
Okay, let's take 1 or 2 minutes and maybe there's some more questions.
I wondered if, you know, if there's time, if there are no questions, whether anyone would just like to say something about their own experience of perhaps rounding and the effect that they've seen, any courses they've been on.
That's a very nice question. So let's see if we have some questions first, and then it would be nice to have that. Okay, so Carolina, are you still there or are you gone? There is some things in the chat. Country. Thank you, greetings. Let's see if Carolina is still there. I think she's gone. Carolina's gone. Okay, so it says from Sarah from Barcelona, thank you so much for your complete presentation for this new wonderful book. It will be especially useful for my country. Yes, and I'm working with Sarah together to create there an invincibility group. So that's really beautiful. And then there is respect and thanks and greeting from Croatia. And thank you very much from Belgium. And is there any other question you want to release your microphone and talk and see if there's a question from your side? Anybody?
Hi, my name is Michelle. I'm from Argentina. I really enjoyed your talk. I just want to share my experience. We've been meditating since the pandemic got here in Argentina. It's been more than 4 months. We are doing the CD program together, and even during weekends, we are doing. Hi, Mona. Good morning. So,
just continue, Michelle. Rosa, we have to mute you quickly until Michelle is finished, and then you can ask the question, Rosa. Okay, Michelle, just continue.
And even during weekends, we are doing rounding. At the beginning, we didn't know if doing the program together by Zoom would have an effect. But 4 months after, I can say that here in Argentina, we feel like a family, that we are all doing the program together. So the effect, we can feel it in the air. So if you can say in that way, hope that maybe in the future there can there will be any study that prove that. But well, I can say that we feel a good family feeling here. So just wanted to share that. Thank you very much, and Jay, good day.
Thank you, Michelle. That's really beautiful. I've just actually made a note of your country and actually your name. I thought I would pass this on to David Orme Johnson. Excuse me. My voice is going. Keep going.
You want to drink something, Patricia? Yeah. And I will ask Rosa to have a question while or you can just drink and then we wait.
Sorry, Michelle, I just wanted to say, I wanted to pass this information on to those that do research on the Maharishi Effect, because I think it's inspiring for them to hear this. That's all.
Very good. Beautiful. And Rosa, you had a question? Now we don't hear you, Rosa. You have to unmute, huh? Rosa, shall I unmute you or you want to do that? Yes, now you can
just
talk.
To say, no questions. It has been very clear, very beautiful. Thank you, Patricia Sanders, and thank you, Mona, because in this moment, these very beautiful words about invincibility are so just. So thank you very much. Jai Gurudev.
And Patrizia, we will work in Argentina. I'm also Rajajeshi of Argentina. We will work now with the team there to get an invincibility group, a permanent for Argentina.
That's
Probably a
wonderful.
mastermind group. So that's our aim, our goal. And we have the great support of the national director of Argentina. Okay, so any other comment from anybody? Seems fine. I think there's nothing more. So beautiful. So Patrizia, thank you again for this really brilliant, absolutely fascinating talk. And your book is very, very precious. And we will do now together group meditation 10 minutes. So I will stop the recording and the live streaming. So 1 second, and then we start. And then